Babz.
Good morning, Jeff Grant.
Hi, Babz.
How are you? Hi, Harry Droz.
We're still on Zoom time.
Oh my God. Is everybody like me zoomed out? I'm
Oh,
telling
yeah, of course. Are you kidding?
you. Good morning. Welcome to Criminal Justice Insider. I am Babz Rawls-Ivy.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
How are you, Jeff?
We're doing pretty good, Babz. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
the state of
All
the world
things
is,
considered.
yeah, the state of the world is a little sad, and we're more than a little sad, but we're just trying to stay centered.
I'm glad.
I see I see you out there. That makes me really happy.
I'm trying.
Yeah,
Trying not to get shot, trying not to get arrested, trying not to trying to stay out of the way.
I haven't left home in 3 months, so that's the story, Babz.
Oh my God.
But I'm old.
So me too. I'm getting close to old. I'm in the old group. So today's show, of course, is sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven. Thank you,
Great
Community
friends.
Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Lynn Springer, wherever you are.
Yeah, and Andrew Kaplan, of course.
Thank you.
Yep.
So today we have as our guest, we're not really in the studio, we're in Zoom world. We have Eileen Keys, Nakisha Ayala, and
Nishka. Hi,
Nishka. Nishka Ayala, Eileen Keys, and Isis Deloach.
Oh.
Hi.
Isis has the coolest name ever.
Well, she's a warrior goddess. What else would she be? So,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
So they are from the Connecticut Children with Incarcerated Parents Initiative. Let me give you a little bit of rundown on Eileen. Eileen is a project manager with Central Connecticut State University's Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy. Do you know Andrew
Clark?
What's his name?
Andrew Clark.
Andrew Clark. Do you know Andrew Clark?
Only a little bit. I've only worked with him for over 12 years.
I haven't seen him in a long time. Somebody had posted up a show when he was on. And so it was nice to see a picture of him because I hadn't seen him in a long time. Give him my best regards.
I will.
Please. He's such a delight. I met him at a dinner party a long time ago and we've been friends, but I haven't talked to him in a long time.
Okay.
Let's see. Who else? Nishka is a forensic interviewer at Kleinberg Children's Advocacy Center in Hartford.
Kleinberg, yeah.
And Isis, what do you do? Because I don't have your details.
So I just recently graduated from CCSU with my social work degree, and I'm currently in my master's program right now at NCAT and UNCG, and I'm also doing an internship for the reentry program down there in Guilford County.
Okay, very good. So today we are having a conversation about children of incarcerated parents. Is that what we're talking about today?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's it.
All right, so what should we know about children of incarcerated parents? Where should we begin?
Aileen, this is your crew. So why don't you kick it off and then introduce everybody and tell us what's going on?
Okay. I certainly think the answer would best come from those that have experienced it personally. So I don't mean to speak for them. And that's why I'm super happy that we have Nishka and Isis here. That's a huge question, but I think probably the biggest thing that I could think of to try to answer succinctly is that they want to have a relationship, generally speaking, with their parent. They want their relationship with their parent to be viewed as a child-parent relationship. These are, in the most basic terms, still children and parents. They're enduring a circumstance that is extraordinarily difficult where their parent is incarcerated. But we cannot allow ourselves to lose sight of the fact that these are still children and these are their moms and dads. And then they want to be, again, I feel a little uncomfortable speaking on behalf of them, but from what I hear, and from what I have studied, they want to be taken from where they're at, listened to when they need to speak, not forced to speak. And if they are angry in that moment, they want a receptive ear to allow them to be angry. But if the next day, if this day they hate their mom or dad and they're angry at them for the fact that they are enduring the separation, but the next day or 2 days later, they're desperately missing that parent and they want to see them and they want to be like them someday. They need to be taken where they are at, accepted for where they're at, have their relationship respected, and to be supported, and to recognize that they could be really struggling with fear for how their parent is being treated, if their parent's okay, have some flexibility and understanding. I could go on, but I'll let Nisha and Isis, please, from your perspective and your experiences, if you don't mind sharing with us what you think you may be needed, but also from those that you've spoken to and
Of course. So just, go ahead.
And Nisha, give us your early childhood background and tell us, really about yourself and how old were you when you had a parent who went to prison? Give us the whole background.
Okay, so I was 3 or 4 years old when my dad was incarcerated. I was living in Puerto Rico at that time. After his incarceration, he was sent to New Jersey. And we had to move out here. So we moved to Connecticut. My dad was incarcerated for 9, almost 10 years. When we moved to Connecticut, so it's myself and I have two brothers. So it was my mom and my 2 brothers. We moved here, not knowing anyone, not knowing anything. My mom was a single parent, obviously, because my dad was incarcerated. And it was really hard. It was really difficult. At that time when I was younger, I didn't understand why my dad was incarcerated. I don't think my mom was really honest about it until, I got older, maybe like 8, 10 years old. That's when I started understanding the reason why my dad was incarcerated. And it was really hard. It was a struggle. And I've always discussed, every time I talk about this, I say how hard it was, especially like during my middle school years, because I didn't have that support system and I wasn't understood when I had behavioral issues at school. They didn't try to understand me. They didn't try to connect with me. It's not, having a parent incarcerated is not like having 2 parents that are divorced. It's very different because you don't have that parent there. That parent can't be there for, school activities, school events, birthday parties, holidays. And, the hardest part was there were times where I wanted to talk to my dad and I couldn't, because I couldn't just pick up the phone and call him. I had to wait for him to call us. And when he did call us, there was so much that we wanted to say, but time was so limited that, sometimes I would be on the phone with him and the call would just disconnect. And, as a child, it's really devastating. And like Aileen said, just being understood, being heard. And I feel like I didn't have that growing up.
But if your dad went to prison when you were 3 years old, when did you know he was in prison? When did they tell you about it? When's the first time you visited him?
So I actually remember being at home when we were in Puerto Rico and like the feds coming into the house. I remember some of it. And like my mom ended up like taking us out of the house. And within like months after that, like it was just like it all happened very fast. I remember like seeing my mom like packing everything in the house. My dad was gone after that. And then like we left. I remember like just like it was like a goodbye party, I guess, or something that my grandparents did for us, and like my family saying goodbye. And of course I didn't really understand what was going on. But we left. We got here to Connecticut. I don't remember how long it took for us to be able to see him. But I do know that we weren't able to see him often. It was like a 3-4 hour drive. We would only be able to visit him on weekdays. My mom didn't really want us missing school. It wouldn't be an excuse absence. And then there were times where we would drive all the way to New Jersey and there would be like a lockdown. Or one time my mom, her pants were too tight. They didn't let us in the facility. So it was hard.
Where was he? Fort Dix or?
Yeah.
So tell me, so Nisha, so growing up the way that you did, knowing what you know, did this influence why you're doing the work that you are doing? How did you come through that, and how did that influence you into deciding what you wanted to do for a career?
So initially, when I started college, I actually wanted to be a juvenile probation officer. That changed. I don't know why it changed, but I did want to, I wanted to prevent youth from like being my dad. You know what I mean? My dad didn't have support growing up, and he ended up doing things that brought him to where he ended up. I went to school for criminal justice just because I've always had that interest in it, having my dad incarcerated. I don't know, it just inspired me, I guess, to go to school for criminal justice. I like working with kids though. That's my passion. And I didn't realize that until I started working at the Boys and Girls Club my sophomore year. So yeah.
So being a forensic interviewer, talk a little bit about what is that? What does that mean?
So a forensic interviewer, so what I do is I work with police and DCF in the investigation of child abuse cases, whether it's physical or sexual abuse. Kids who have experienced sexual or physical abuse come to our Children's Advocacy Center, and I conduct an interview to gather all the facts about the abuse for the investigation. And we do it that way. So that it's a child-friendly environment rather than them being interviewed by a police officer.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's recorded for just for investigation purposes so that the child doesn't have to keep telling the story over and over.
Okay.
That's great.
And so Isis, you do the work that you do. Why?
Oh, I have always been passionate about the jail system, being that my father was incarcerated as well. My father was incarcerated for 10 years, and I had to deal with the stigma that came with it. Also, it was just like they said before, it was a very hard time for me to process my emotions myself. So I feel like my take of it is I want to be a clinical social worker in the jail system, men's jail in particular. And what I want to do is connect families together so they don't have to deal with, the struggles that I had to growing up. Like mentioned before, it was very awkward not being able to just pick up the phone and call your father when you wanted to, or having a visit and not being able to physically touch because it wasn't allowed. And those are vital connections that are lost during that period of time, especially the cognitive behavioral of the child. And having that connection with their parent is important for growth. So what I want to do is just kind of reform those policies so that is a norm, because it should be. At the end of the day, that's still their father, that's still their mother, and they still love them. And I feel like right now, the system kind of corrupts that because you're not able to have that connection. So I feel like the most eye-opening moment was during my BSW program when I did my own girls incarcerated group. So it was a group of 5 middle school young girls that all had an incarcerated parent. And what we learned was mindfulness tricks and tips to deal with the situation and also have a conversation about it. This was the first time that these young girls had a platform to be able to say what was on their mind and their emotions. And it was very powerful to me to hear their stories. I know when I first started it, I did not let them know that my dad was incarcerated because I wanted to gain their trust naturally. And we had a pivotal moment where we all said, talked about our past experience, and I opened up with them. And it was just such a beautiful moment seeing them so overwhelmed with joy, knowing that I was in their shoes in the position that I am now, and that they can be that one day. So from that moment, I knew that anything with an incarcerated system is what I wanted to do. So right now in my MSW program, I'm going to continue this reentry program that is going on in North Carolina. It connects families together and it establishes that relationship. So anything with incarcerated parents and children is kind of my passion.
So Eileen, how many kids are we? I'm sorry, Jeff. Eileen, how many kids are we talking about in Connecticut that have incarcerated parents.
And Aileen, did both Nishka and Isis come through your program? Because I see you're looking with such pride, like a mother. So you must know them well.
That's so great that you could actually pick up on that, because that is exactly how I'm feeling. I'm just blown away. They impress me every time I hear them speak, and they're just amazing, wonderful young women. So thank you for pointing that out. I do feel that way. So in Connecticut, I want to give a little bit of background. In June 2016, the number was about 18,000 kids in Connecticut that in one day, we did a one-day point in time search. About 18,000 kids had a parent incarcerated on that day in Connecticut. Wow. And then
18,000?
Yes. And it's a small state. Mm-hmm. And then, and again, that doesn't even talk about how many in a year, how many over 5 years, right? Or in a lifetime. And then more recently, we asked DOC for an updated number. And through Trina Sexton, who has been an amazing, wonderful person to work with through the Department of Correction, she was able to get that number for us. And the number as of the end of April was about 13,000. And that was after a significant decrease in our prison population. So we are in a remarkable time of low numbers, if you will, for incarcerated individuals in Connecticut, but still 13,000 in a state this small and during a horrible viral deadly pandemic is a significant number of kids that are dealing with already the challenges of having a parent incarcerated. But then during this deadly pandemic where they know there's a great risk out there because all of a sudden they can't go to school, they can't play outside, they can't see their friends or their grandparents. So they know that their parents are in danger also. They know their parents can't isolate. They may hear on the news all of the concern over people who are incarcerated and how once it gets in the prisons, it's just going to spread like wildfire. They can hear that. And now, of course, all of this unrest, if you will, which is, I know, a significant understatement, with the conflicts between law enforcement and community. So even though it's only 13,000 right now, that's a lot of children in this state that are worried about their parents, and have a lot of anxiety, I'm sure, over their well-being.
So what kind of programs do you, go ahead.
But when you say 13,000, that's 13,000 in the Connecticut justice system, right? So that number could be larger because there's parents in the federal system, there's parents in other state systems.
Exactly. And in terms of, and we know we have Danbury here, federal prison, which has parents. Nationwide, it's estimated that 1 in 14 kids in the country have had a parent whom they have lived with go to prison.
Wow.
Which is just an astounding number, because obviously if you've lived with that parent, then you know there has been a strong connection, and that's a significant loss that you will really see and feel. It's estimated that 1 in 28 kids have at any given time in the United States a parent incarcerated, and that approximately 10 million children have experienced the incarceration of a parent at some point in their lives. Again, those are nationwide numbers. So this is really, in terms of prevalence, this is an issue that really needs to be considered, looked at, and addressed. And then we also, and I know we haven't talked about this, but we also have research that's come out more recently talking about all of the negative health and well-being consequences and financial consequences that can be imposed if your parent is incarcerated. And so when you put those two things together, I'm so glad you guys are doing this topic. And that you are aware of that. It's wonderful. So
what sort of programs what programs are available to you? Because I have no awareness of this program. And I think it's a great idea, because what happens to these kids when their parents go to prison? I think it creates a unique set of challenges for school and work and all these other kinds of things when you have kids who have these emotions and don't know what to do with them, and might be feeling like other or isolated or embarrassed or ashamed or any number of things. So what sort of things do you offer, and how closely do you work with the school systems and boards of ed and all of those kinds of things to provide support to children whose parents are incarcerated?
So since our funding started in fiscal year 2008, we have provided funds to multiple and very diverse types of interventions for children who have a parent incarcerated and their family members. And we have also worked with faculty at Central Connecticut State University to evaluate those programs so we could try to determine how these different types of interventions impacted children. So over these 12 years, we have funded a wide variety of types. And actually, the one that Isis mentioned earlier that she was part of, where she was working with those 5 middle school girls who all had experienced parental incarceration and were learning mindfulness, that was through one of our smaller grants, which is part of a community engagement initiative that we have at Central. One of Central's primary pillars is community engagement. And so we worked with the social work department at Central and the YWCA and the school district in New Britain to allow this program to occur. And we were very fortunate that ISIS was part of that. Currently, we're funding a statewide program called CLICK, Connecting Through Literacy, Incarcerated Parents, Their Children, and Caregivers. It's a mentoring program that uses literacy as a mechanism to connect children and families, children and the incarcerated parents. So the child picks 6 books a year that they will receive for free and that the parent will receive also for free, that the child has selected. And then they read the books together. And then they each meet with a mentor who works with them on whatever's needed, but certainly also these readings and with connecting to each other and how you can communicate about the reading. There's many reasons why we think that's great, certainly to hopefully develop a further interest in reading, but also, and the connection. But also sometimes we hear that children and parents, you know, we heard Nishka and Isis talking about how important it was to have those connections and those visits. And sometimes there's so much importance placed on it and so much anticipation and excitement that once you then get together or you get on the phone, there's so much you want to say and so much you want to do that it's almost overwhelming and you don't know where to start and you maybe can freeze. And so these shared readings offer something to talk about, to break the ice, to engage in conversation and the connection without all of the anxiety. And then it can always lead to other things. But anyway, that's one program. There's the Judy Dworin Performance Project that's based out of Hartford. They've been operating for many years. They do a wonderful program at York for the incarcerated women, but also at several of the men's facilities. That's an arts-based intervention, and they work with incarcerated parents and children in the community also. And then we offer also the scholarship program at Central Connecticut State University, which is for anyone at Central who is a student who has experienced familial incarceration at any time in their life. They can apply and they can receive up to $1,500 every semester. So, and that's how we met Nishka and Isis. And so it's a wonderful way also to connect us with our students and to let the students know that we're there. And so if there's anything going on with them that maybe they don't want to share with the university or a particular faculty member, but maybe they're struggling with something, there's a friendly office on campus that they can come to. In terms of schools, Babz, you mentioned, we work with schools. We offer training for anybody. We offer training, technical assistance, consultation. We'll receive phone calls from social workers at schools, even marriage and family therapists that some are at schools, teachers that are interested in, they recognize they have a significant population but don't quite know how to support them. So I'll go in, I'll bring a ton of resources, posters, books, pamphlets. I'll talk to them about how they can make their office a safe space, how they can communicate that it's a safe space. And I will, for free, for anybody, offer training. Oh gosh, I hope I don't get too many phone calls now. But I will.
That's great.
But I would be happy to. We are Connecticut's resource for children with incarcerated parents. We want to do whatever we can. We receive phone calls from clinicians and counselors in the community, churches that want to do something. We want to just be helpful in as many ways as we possibly can. And so if there's a school that wants something maybe during the summer, we could do a training before we start up again in the fall. I'd be happy to do that. And then when people come back in, maybe they'll feel a little better prepared to welcome those students.
So Nisha, tell me a little bit about what these kinds of programs did for you.
Yeah.
How were they helpful to you? What made the difference for you?
So growing up, in school, I never had these programs. It wasn't until I got to college that I learned about the CIP initiative. And I was surprised to see it, honestly. I never thought there would be a scholarship for someone who has been affected by the incarceration of a parent. But if it weren't for this CIP initiative, I probably never would have opened up about my dad's incarceration. I never talked about it with anyone. And it wasn't until I became a part of this initiative that I started talking about it. I met other people who have experienced it. One of my favorite parts actually was Aileen and we went to Washington, D.C. for it was a youth listening session where it was 19 of us who have been affected by the incarceration of a parent. We sat together, we shared our thoughts and opinions, and then we presented them in front of an audience of I think it was federal departments and agencies. Is that right, Aileen?
Yep.
And yeah. And so that was a wonderful experience. Not only being able to, talk to other youth who have been affected by the incarceration of a parent, but also to be able to share our opinions and our thoughts in front of these federal departments and agencies. It was a wonderful experience. So,
Isis?
Yes, definitely what Nishka said about, it was very eye-opening. I remember I was actually speaking on a panel, my first panel that I did for Children with Incarcerated Parents Initiative. And I never forgot when I was talking to Aileen, she asked me, she was like, are you comfortable with this? And I usually never get that question. I'm like, oh no, I'm fine. I'm in college. I can speak about it. And I remember, being in front of these strangers that I don't know. I mean, they were professional staff, students, and, just all these people. And it wasn't even a lot. It was probably like a group at that time. It was a group of 20 or so. And I started to tell my story and I started to choke up. And I was just like, wait, I'm still dealing with this stigma and I still feel a sense of pain. And I always thought that I was okay because I was like, I'm older now. It doesn't bother me. But this program has definitely helped me to use my voice as a platform and to, speak for my girls that were at my group and, that may not have a voice at this time, and letting these, legislators know, teachers know how important groups and advocation is. And I mean, it kind of solidified why I'm doing. I always knew I wanted to be in the incarcerated, system, working reform and all that, but I didn't really understand my purpose. And I feel like with these groups, with these panels, meeting these people, connecting and understanding what is really happening and what we need for change, it made me realize that, I'm not done and I need to keep going. And I feel like, with Aileen, she's just an amazing support system. And she just really kind of opened my eyes, and she just always made sure that my story was going to be known. And I felt important, and I felt like what I was saying was needed to be known. So I feel like I found my voice through this program. That was the biggest thing, and that there needs to be change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really valuable, Isis, because Babz and I have both been to prison, and I won't speak for Babz, but no matter what I've achieved in the world, I can be just cruising along, doing my ministry or whatever I'm doing, and then all of a sudden something hits.
Right.
And I can wake up the next morning and just feel this pit of despair or something missing, and I have to be reminded, oh yeah, that I've had trauma in my life.
Yes, and I feel like that's why I'm just such an advocate for making this normalized in the school system. I feel like speaking to my girls once again, they're just like, I learned so much from them. But I realized how much it's not talked about and how that is affecting them as their growth. Because, when we first started talking about it, it was kind of like, it's not a big deal. Like how I was, like, I'm used to it. But when we really got down to it and we started to develop that trust, you could see how vulnerable and how strong they were to say their stories. And it was beautiful to see that one group could change these 5 girls' life. Now, what could this group do for millions of students that are dealing with this every day? Because I feel like it's so normalized to be like, oh, let's not talk about it. You know, they're going through something. But you don't realize speaking about it helps them, because when you kind of ignore it and dismiss it, they feel like that they're othered and they're different from everybody else. But in reality, there are so many students dealing with this on a daily basis. And I feel like having these groups, and that's what I said with our group, it wasn't never based on like, hey, we're all have the same thing. Our parents are incarcerated. Let's talk about it. It was bigger than that. It was a safe place for them. It was a way to, you know, deal with mindfulness, breathing tactics, just when they get upset or feel like, you know, like they said before, there's days where you're okay with it. And then there's days you're dealing with it and you don't know how to process it. Something can come up, like their date could be pushed back and it could affect you. And, you know, if you don't talk about it, you just seem as a, oh, they're lashing out, they're just a bad student, but you really don't know what's going on in the household. So I just feel like it's just such an important topic that's overlooked and it needs to be addressed.
So Eileen, are there programs that are gender specific? Are there programs just for girls? Are there programs just for boys? Are there programs for kids that are dealing with other issues that might have some real impact on what they're dealing with? Maybe they're from the lesbian and gay, queer community. Maybe they're from the transgender community. Maybe they have some other kind of issue like substance abuse. Do you have programs that address all those things? Because I would imagine that kids would self-medicate if they don't have a place to go. Kids will withdraw or find other ways to occupy their time if they don't have positive reinforcement to help direct them. So do you have programs that are that specific, or do you just sort of come together as best you can?
Great questions. So Believe in Me Empowerment Corporation in New Haven.
I know that program very well. Yes.
So their program, they had a program. I haven't checked in a little bit to see if they're still active, particularly with everything that's going on, but they had a wonderful after school program where they did split the children by sex. And the kids met. It was like females Monday, Wednesday, every other Friday, boys Tuesday, Thursday, every other Friday. That was a wonderful program that the kids really enjoyed. And so that was a wonderful one. And it also had a focus on Kwanzaa. So that also kind of got at an identity and your African-American community and how it engages with community and the values that it holds and how you should give back to community. And they would always have a Kwanzaa celebration, which was wonderful. So that was a program where they did split, and their focus was also reading. They did talk about how they do have parents incarcerated. That wasn't the sole focus, though, at all. It's interesting. Some programs get the kids together. It is a focus that their parents are incarcerated, and it's part of the curriculum, if you will. And then others don't. And that's one thing that we've been trying to look at is the value the same if you bring kids together with a shared experience, but don't kind of make them talk about the fact that their parents incarcerated, but you're allowing them to meet. Because one thing, Nishka and Isis were talking about kind of that isolation and the stigma. So by getting together with people, seeing that you have a shared experience, is that valuable enough and engaging in a positive activity, like you said, Babz, without making them talk about the fact that their parent is incarcerated. And actually, believe me, I hope they don't mind me sharing this story. It to me was kind of a unique story. They had two boys that showed up on their first day of a new, it was a year-long program, and they had a summer camp. They had two boys that showed up, and when they saw each other, they laughed. And as the staff, spoke with the boys to kind of find out what it was an interesting laugh. Why were you guys laughing? And it turned out that sometime prior, the boys were outside their school. They went to school together. And the one boy said to the other, "Oh, are you waiting for your dad to pick you up?" And the boy just punched him. And now they're in this program. They see each other there and they laugh. And it was kind of this realization that, oh, you brought up my dad. but that's because your parents incarcerated. And so it's, this kind of gets at the behaviors. Nishka talked about, nobody really understood her behaviors, and she was struggling, and she was expressing that she was suffering through negative, if you will, behavior, but nobody was being responsive to it. No one was asking her what's going on. No one was providing her the support and the care and the listening ear. So these programs can do that. In terms of, what was the other, let's see, you asked about gender. We don't have anything that specifically is looking at LGBTQ. Oh, this was another thing I wanted to say. Some kids, there is so much going on in their lives. And you brought up, Babz, these other things, these other potential shared experiences and potential other challenges that are going on in their life, substance abuse, LGBTQ identities. So some kids say, yeah, my parents incarcerated, but that's not the biggest thing in my life right now. I'm poor. My mom is barely around because she's working so much, and so I don't really have anybody home with me. Or we heard, Nishka, when we were at the DC thing, we heard this one kid, what he kept bringing up was that he couldn't play soccer. When his father went to prison, he had to all of a sudden work and bring money to the family and help watch his siblings, his younger siblings. And he loved soccer. And so he couldn't play soccer. And so his big thing that he kept bringing up was that he couldn't play soccer. And now you had other kids where it was, anger. Another young man was just yelling at the feds that were there because he was so angry that they took his father away. And part of that, I believe, is that unfortunately his father died while he was in prison. And so this young man lost the opportunity to ever be with his father again, to ask the questions that he wants answers to, and everything. So the experience is wide ranging. And that's why when I provided my first answer, I was saying really listen, because you really need to take the kids where they're at. And that may not be the biggest issue. It could be they're being abused. Could be that poverty, could be bullying that they're experiencing.
So Eileen, can you talk a little bit about the racial breakdown? Because I see Nishka is a Latina and Isis is an African American. What do you see? And do you make strides toward cultural competency around these programs?
We do. That was one thing with Believe in Me that was so wonderful, is that it really did focus on also your identity as having an African American background and being in. It was held in Newhallville, and so it was also kind of a local community program, and they did community gardening around the neighborhood. In terms of racial breakdown, from the statistics that we garnered from the Department of Correction at the end of April, shared with us that based off of the race and ethnicity that the parents reported for themselves and the dependents that they had, we were able to pull out that of those 13,000 children, about 5,856 had a parent that identified themselves as Black. 3,931 had a parent who identified themselves as Hispanic. Just over 3,000 the parent had identified themselves as white, and then Asian was 52, and American Indian 49. So obviously we know our prison system is overwhelmingly and disproportionately represented by racial and ethnic minorities as parents. And so of course that extends to their children and the community. And so we do want our programs to be mindful of that. With our mentoring program, they try and pair based on sex, but also common interests and shared backgrounds and shared culture. I do think that's very important. They also provide training specifically on how to work with children with incarcerated parents, which is crucial in my opinion. We've had some programs where they just want to go in and apply their typical counseling and therapeutic model for these children without engaging in training that's specific to the experiences of children and families that have a criminal justice involved family member. And you're really not going to be able to connect as well and fully understand what's going on if you don't engage in that training. And part of that is bias. And I think you really need to understand implicit bias for racial and ethnic minorities. Mm-hmm. And also criminal justice involved families. Sure, do you hold a bias, for these families? If this young man that his father's in prison, maybe even for a heinous crime, let's say, and that little boy comes to you and says, I want to be like my daddy when I grow up. You are, maybe as the teacher, do you kind of go, we've heard of teachers saying, well, you don't need to grow up like your parent. You're strong, you're smart, you're kind, you're going to be successful. And, the teacher could be saying that with the best of intentions. They're trying to build up the child.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've just dismissed and degraded part of them. Mm-hmm. And they could be saying, I want to be my daddy, because they see a strong, funny, loving, positive individual. Yeah. They're not seeing necessarily what you read in the paper. And so always checking in on our biases, whether they're racial and ethnic focused and or criminal justice involved focused. But everybody, but especially if you're working with children with incarcerated parents, you need to constantly check in on your biases.
Well, I certainly hope my kids saw me that way, Aileen.
So Eileen, talk a little bit about, because I have 4 kids. My kids are all adopted, and each of them had parents that were connected to the criminal justice system. Talk a little bit about, do you work well, or do you work with DCF in terms of dealing with kids that are in the foster care system that have parents who are incarcerated? And oftentimes parents who are incarcerated, their kids go into foster care, and oftentimes kids are terminated from their families, and oftentimes are adopted under those circumstances. So are you mindful, or is there some awareness around that particular population of kids and families and incarcerated folks?
Also, Aileen, after you answer that, maybe Nishka and Isis, you can tell us your experience with this. What happened with your family? Were you in single parent families, or did you have to get separated from your family? So we want to kind of hear those stories too. So go ahead, Aileen.
Sure. I will just say I was a foster care social worker in Detroit for a short amount of time, and that is my hat's off to people that can do that work. I did not last long. I felt I was failing those kids, like everybody else, because my caseload was too big. It was very, very difficult. So we are very lucky that we were actually just about to start a partnership with the Department of Correction and DCF as part of an OJJDP grant, where we'll be working with incarcerated fathers who are preparing for release, and whose children are subject to a DCF. They are DCF guardians. And we're going to be working with those parents on strengthening their parenting skills and connecting them and building their relationship with their children. Whether the goal is to reunify that parent with that child, that will be a case-by-case basis. But regardless, we want to work on making and helping those relationships and everything. Another thing with DCF, I'm glad you brought up parental termination. In 1997, the Congress passed the Adoption and Safe Families Act to prevent children from languishing in the foster care system for years and years and years and years. And it provided a timeline where if a child is in the Department of Correction for 15 of 22 months, then the state shall file to terminate that parent's rights. It, of course, had an unintended negative consequence of disproportionately terminating the parental rights of parents who are in prison. The average sentence for state prison is 34 months. And of course, that goes beyond the timeline that the federal ASFA legislation dictated. So a recent study by the Marshall Project found that in a 10-year period, children were more likely to have their parents' rights terminated if the parent was incarcerated when the parent had no allegation, much less a substantiation of abuse, neglect, drug abuse, anything. They were more likely to have their parents' rights permanently terminated if they were incarcerated, more so than kids who had substantiated abuse, physical and sexual, by that parent.
That's terrible.
So it's a significant problem nationwide. Several other states have recognized this and passed state legislation to alleviate the mandate of that timeline, and have said that, if it's due to solely a parent's incarceration, then the state does not need to proceed with terminating that parent's rights. I mean, if you had a decent parent, but they're in for selling drugs, or they're in for, bad checks, and they're only going to be in for 2.5 years, you don't need to permanently sever that relationship. Mm-hmm. That's our argument. So we're working with DCF. We're trying to get Connecticut to look at its practices. We're hoping that we can make some headway there. So that is one thing that we're doing in terms of adoption and parental right termination. There are other options. You could be a permanent guardian, but still allow that parent to be the parent, but allow the child to have some permanency with a permanent placement if that parent is serving a longer term of incarceration. But I share Jeff's interest in hearing from Isis and Nishka too, so I'll pass the mic.
And we have about a few minutes, so we got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, just so I was with my mom. My mom was a single parent. It was my mom and my 2 brothers. My maternal grandfather helped us a lot financially.
Yeah, so the same. I grew up single parent household. At the time, my grandmother definitely took the role of helping me as well, but it wasn't, walk in a park, but she did it. And
And Isis, are you from New Haven?
No, I actually grew up in Virginia, and I moved up here around my 9th grade year. So my dad was incarcerated in Virginia.
So if you could say one thing to young people who may happen to be listening, or maybe there's folks who work with young people that probably have some similarities to your experiences, what can both of you say to young people out there who are coming through a system that they may not understand? They may have parents who are one or both parents incarcerated. What sort of words of wisdom or pearls of wisdom that you can offer to them to help them on their journey?
I would definitely say that they matter. Their voice matters, their opinion matters, their feelings are validated, and that they're not alone. I feel like definitely I wish I would have heard that when I was growing up, because I felt like I was the only person in the world that was dealing with this, when in reality, they're like, the statistics say there's millions of children that face this every day. And I would let them know that they're strong and that there's, it's happiness on the other side. Like, they will get through it. And dealing with the emotions of growing up as a child in general and going through childhood and being able to deal with an incarcerated parent, it shows how strong and determined they are. So that's what I would say. Just keep going.
Yeah, I would say the same as Isis, to be strong, let them know that they do matter. We are not statistics, and just to let them know that not to let others' misjudgment define who they are.
You two know each other?
This is the first time.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
so,
I actually graduated 2 years ago, so.
Well, thank y'all so much for being with us. Jeff, you want to talk about Eileen? This was a wonderful conversation. I hope y'all come back when we come back next season so that we can unpack this a little bit more, because I think this is a worthwhile conversation, one that does not get the light of day on it in the press and in community. So thank y'all for being so gracious in your sharing. This is our last show for the year. The next show we do is a party show. I'm sure Jeff has invited you.
Here's my plug for the June 19th show.
Yes, that's what I was like. I'm giving it to you, Jeff. Plug away.
Eileen, before I do that, why don't you just give us contact information for your program and where people can contact you and all?
Sure. Our website is ctcip.org. And I would like to say we have a wonderful children's section that's all cartoon-like. Took several years to design, but I would love people to check that out if they have children. And then you can email us at ctcip at ccsu.edu.
And are you part of IMRP? Is that right?
We need a different name, but yes, I'm part of I'm part of CCSU's Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy, which we also have the Racial Profiling Prohibition Project, Sentencing Commission, and several other wonderful initiatives.
So it's CCSU, IMRP, CTCIP. Is that right?
Yes. So IMRP. No, it's hard.
I don't know. All right. Here's the plug. June 19th, 2-hour show special. Our season 3 wrap party. Babz and I have been talking about doing a party for our former guests, but we would have had to do it either in a hall or cram people into a studio that only seats 5 people. But now, because of Zoom, we can have everybody. So we've invited all 50 plus of our former guests, plus a few friends and loved ones. And so we're all going to congregate for 2 hours on June 19th here on Zoom, but simulcasted and podcasted everywhere. And the 3 of you are invited. You probably got the invitations already. And we are hoping that we can get a crowd. And Babz and I have been texting each other all week saying, we have no idea how to handle this. This could be completely out of hand. There's no way.
Welcome to the circus. It'll be fun.
But if you look on the prisons.org website or on the Facebook events page or everywhere else in our social media, the list of people who are invited is just super cool. They come from all different facets of justice and criminal justice. And so it has a shot, it'll definitely be fun, but it has a shot of people meeting each other who've not seen each other for a while, or maybe who've never met each other. So please join us June 19th.
Yes. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
Mishka. Thank you, Isis. This was such a welcome conversation. Thank you, Jeff Grant.
Babz, another one in the can.
Yes, and thank you to the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven for their support.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lynn Springer.
And Andrew Kaplan. Love you, Babz. Thank you all so much for joining us. It was a wonderful show. Thank you.
Harry, play us out.